Every time a car is fueled in Tokyo, a factory powers up in Berlin, or a cargo ship leaves Shanghai, the transaction pays a silent, invisible tribute to Washington. It is not a tax written into any international law, nor is it a tariff debated on the floor of the United Nations. It is a ghost in the machine of global commerce, a hidden architecture that dictates the price of everything from a gallon of milk to the stability of entire nations. This unseen force ensures that the paper printed by the United States Treasury holds dominion over the earth. It is the petrodollar system. To the untrained eye, the global economy appears as a chaotic web of independent nations trading goods and services. But beneath the surface, a singular mechanism forces nearly every country into a state of financial dependency. This system was not a natural evolution of free markets. It was a deliberate, engineered masterstroke of geopolitical survival, born in the shadows of an economic crisis during the 1970s. Unpacking its origins reveals how a desperate nation managed to tether the world's most vital resource to its own fiat currency. To understand how paper conquered the planet, one must look back to a moment of absolute desperation. By the summer of 1971, the American economic engine was stalling out. The staggering costs of the Vietnam War and sweeping domestic spending programs had drained the nation's gold reserves to dangerously low levels. Foreign governments, sensing weakness, began demanding physical gold in exchange for their holding of United States dollars. The post-World War financial order, known as the Bretton Woods Agreement, which strictly pegged the dollar to gold, was collapsing under its own weight. On a fateful Sunday evening in August of that year, President Richard Nixon shocked the world by severing the dollar's tie to gold entirely. The greenback was suddenly unmoored, floating on the turbulent seas of global currency markets with nothing but the promise of the United States government backing it. Inflation surged domestically. The purchasing power of the dollar plummeted on the global stage. America needed a new anchor, something universally desired and absolutely essential to force the world to keep holding and using its currency. The answer arrived wrapped in a catastrophic global event. In 1973, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, universally known as OPEC, launched an oil embargo against the United States and its allies. The price of crude quadrupled almost overnight. Lines at gas stations stretched for miles, and the American economy ground to a crippling halt. The embargo was a devastating economic weapon, but within its chaos lay the seeds of an unprecedented opportunity for those who knew how to leverage a crisis. In July 1974, newly appointed Treasury Secretary William Simon boarded a plane for a secret, multi-stop diplomatic mission to the Middle East. His ultimate destination was Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Simon, a former Wall Street bond trader, understood the fundamental mechanics of leverage and debt. He carried a highly classified proposal from the Nixon administration, one designed to solve two monumental problems at once: the vulnerability of the unbacked dollar and the crushing cost of imported energy. The proposed agreement was breathtaking in its simplicity and audacious in its scope. The United States would provide Saudi Arabia with extensive military protection, advanced weaponry, and an ironclad guarantee of the survival of the ruling royal family. In exchange, Saudi Arabia would agree to price all of its oil exports exclusively in United States dollars. Furthermore, the Saudis would take their massive surplus profits from selling oil and reinvest them directly into United States Treasury bonds. This financial loop became known as petrodollar recycling. It was a masterstroke of economic engineering that fundamentally altered the trajectory of global finance. By pricing oil in dollars, Saudi Arabia ensured that every nation on earth, regardless of its own domestic currency, needed a constant supply of American money just to keep the lights on and the factories running. If Japan wanted Saudi oil, Japan had to buy dollar first. If France wanted to fuel its trucks, France needed dollars. The implications of this secret pact were staggering. Almost overnight, an artificial, insatiable global demand for the United States dollar was manufactured out of thin air. The currency was no longer backed by gold stored in a vault in Fort Knox. The dollar was now backed by the black liquid buried beneath the Arabian desert. The greenback had effectively been transformed into a proxy for the world's most critical energy resource, completely rewriting the rules of international trade. Within a year, the rest of OPEC followed Saudi Arabia's lead, agreeing to price their oil exclusively in dollars. The petrodollar system was now fully operational, locking the global economy into a unipolar financial paradigm. The dollar became the undisputed global reserve currency, a status that granted the United States an economic superpower widely referred to by economists as exorbitant privilege. For the average American consumer, this exorbitant privilege translates into a hidden, everyday subsidy that touches every aspect of daily life. Because the world constantly needs dollars to buy oil, the United States can run massive trade deficits without facing the immediate catastrophic hyperinflation that would ruin any other country. The American government can print trillions of dollars to fund wars, bail out banks, or stimulate the economy, knowing the global market will absorb the excess currency like a sponge. This dynamic keeps imported televisions cheap, groceries affordable, and interest rates artificially low for domestic homebuyers. But this immense benefit at home comes at a steep, often devastating cost abroad. For developing nations, the petrodollar system operates as a relentless financial treadmill. Countries in the global south must export their own hard goods, raw materials, and cheap labor just to acquire the dollar necessary to buy the energy required to survive. They are trapped in a cycle of perpetual dollar dependency, forced to subordinate their own economic development to the necessity of acquiring foreign paper. The brutal reality of this dependency becomes excruciatingly clear during times of global economic stress. When the United States Federal Reserve raises interest rates to combat domestic inflation, the value of the dollar naturally spikes on the global market. Because oil is priced in dollars, a stronger dollar makes energy instantaneously more expensive for poorer nations, even if the actual per-barrel price of oil remains flat. This dynamic routinely triggers localized economic crises, bankrupting small businesses abroad and plunging millions into poverty simply because of a policy shift in Washington. The mechanics of this dominance are further amplified by the modern banking apparatus. When oil-producing nations deposit their massive dollar profits into Western banks, those institutions utilize fractional reserve banking to multiply the impact. Fractional reserve banking is a system where only a fraction of bank deposits are backed by actual cash on hand and available for withdrawal, allowing the bank to lend out the rest. Wall Street banks take the petrodollar deposits and lend them out globally, creating a cascading expansion of dollar-denominated debt that ensnares governments and corporations worldwide. Beyond mere economics, the petrodollar forged the ultimate weapon of modern statecraft, the financial sanction. Because nearly all international oil trade, and by extension most global commodities, are settled in dollars, the transactions must eventually clear through American correspondent banks. This gives the United States government unparalleled surveillance and control over the hidden arteries of global commerce. The ledger of the world's business runs through servers located on American soil. If Washington decides to isolate a rogue state, it simply cuts off access to the dollar clearing system. Without dollars, a targeted nation cannot legally sell its oil on the open market, nor can it buy essential imports like medicine or agricultural equipment. The target is financially suffocated, exiled from the global economy without a single shot being fired. This immense leverage has allowed the United States to project power far beyond the reach of its aircraft carriers, turning the dollar into a weapon of mass economic destruction. Yet, the foundations of the petrodollar are beginning to show microscopic but significant fractures. The aggressive weaponization of the dollar has forced rival nations to seek alternative financial architectures. Following the sweeping sanctions imposed on Russia, a profound shift began to accelerate across the geopolitical landscape. Major oil producers and consumers started exploring the unthinkable, settling oil trades in currencies other than the dollar, threatening the core mechanism of American financial hegemony. China, the world's largest energy importer, has aggressively pushed to buy oil from Saudi Arabia and Russia using its own currency, the yuan. Bilateral trade agreements are quietly being negotiated outside the dollar-dominated system, utilizing local currencies and alternative payment networks. The BRICS nations, an economic bloc comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are actively discussing mechanisms to bypass Western financial networks entirely, seeking to untether their supply chain economics from Washington's control. At the same time, the fundamental dynamics of the energy market itself are shifting. The rapid rise of renewable energy technologies and the United States' own transformation into a net exporter of oil have altered the absolute dependency that defined the 1970s agreement. The ironclad pact forged in Jeddah over 50 years ago is facing unprecedented stress from a multipolar world that no longer wishes to pay the invisible tribute required to participate in the global economy. Even so, dismantling a system so deeply embedded in the bedrock of global finance is a monumental task. The petrodollar is not merely a trading mechanism for crude oil. It is the connective tissue of international debt, the primary reserve asset of central banks, and the absolute lifeblood of global liquidity. Over $7.5 trillion in daily foreign exchange transactions are inextricably linked to this singular currency standard, making any sudden transition incredibly dangerous for the entire global banking system. If the petrodollar system were to truly unravel, the shockwaves would fundamentally reorder the global hierarchy. The United States would lose its exorbitant privilege, facing the sudden, terrifying reality of financing its massive national debt without a captive global audience forced to buy its treasury bonds. The cost of borrowing would skyrocket, inflation could become untethered from federal control, and the standard of living for the average American would face a severe reckoning. Conversely, emerging markets might find liberation from the relentless pressure of dollar-denominated energy costs. A fractured multi-currency energy market could lead to a more balanced, albeit highly volatile, global economy. The transition would be chaotic, marked by fierce currency wars, shifting trade alliances, and a frantic scramble by nations to secure hard assets and critical supply chains outside the watchful eye of the American financial system. The story of how oil fuels United States power is ultimately a testament to the sheer ingenuity of financial engineering. It demonstrates how a piece of paper, backed by nothing but a promise and a strategic alliance, can conquer the world more thoroughly than any standing army. The petrodollar transformed a moment of profound American vulnerability into a half-century of unparalleled global supremacy, hiding the true mechanics of power in plain sight. As the geopolitical tectonic plates shift and new economic alliances form in the shadows, the world watches the ledger of global power carefully. The invisible tax on every barrel of crude may be facing its twilight, but the echoes of that secret pact will resonate through the global economy for generations. The true cost of energy, it turns out, was never just about the price at the pump, but the unseen financial strings that pull the nations of the earth.